you know what to do, and she's shocked that you haven't done it already. Kia ora everybody, and welcome back to Victoria 3. In this video, we're going to talk about the war system, something that people have been talking about for quite some time, many months. In fact, it's probably the most talked about topic in Victoria 3, and it's surrounded by some controversy. The war system takes a step away from Victoria 2, absolutely. It also is somewhat different to other Paradox games, including, of course, the likes of Hearts of Iron 4, which people often refer it to. And you don't need to peek very long at the YouTube comments to see that sort of understanding of the war system in Victoria 3 has carried through, and with it, so too has its criticism. In this video, I'll be talking about the war system to help you get a better feel for what it's like, how it plays, what are its good sides and its downsides, to try and offer a more balanced perspective on the war system in Victoria 3. Let's not muck about, although I should note that there's some spicy America gameplay in the background. I figured a fairly good nation to play, and I've also edited it down a little bit, so you won't need to bear through too much of the boring stuff. Anyway, let's begin. We'll start with the good, and talking a little bit about what the system actually is. Time cards below, of course, as always. Victoria 3's war system, as I mentioned in the introduction, is more hands-off. In this, we control our generals and our admirals, of course. We recruit them. They are characters, and they represent an interest group. What you're seeing me do at the moment is activating my conscripts from across America. These, alongside battalions that we get from building certain barracks, any barracks, certain military buildings, are what comprise our military in Victoria 3. Front lines appear on borders with the conflicts with our neighbours, and we can choose to manually assign our divisions, our generals, to those front lines to attack, defend, or wait. The same thing goes at sea, and you can also plot a naval invasion and raid convoys. All of the actions, as you could tell on screen just there, are fairly straightforward, simple to use. And once you've mobilised your armies, trained them and equipped them, and indeed selected which equipment they should use, or which laws, like I'm doing here, that they may be supported by, it is essentially left up to the AI at that point to play out the battles. You can choose, like I say, to stop and go, or it'll just play it out for you. There are other things, of course, at play here, but in a nutshell, that's how Victoria 3's war system works. The idea here being that it is in line with the design philosophy for Victoria 3. A gentle reminder, this is of course not Hearts of Iron 5. It's a different game. It's also a different game from Victoria 2, the game that it replaced in many ways, a spiritual namesake successor as well. Of course, that's been 12 years since Victoria 2 came out, so I think we need to approach that a little bit pragmatically. The other thing about the good for Victoria 3's war system is its ease of use. Again, this fits in with the design philosophy. It's not about micromanaging every single unit on a front line, clicking them all in different ways. Here, it's about the economic and political simulation, and we are part of that, looking down on it in many ways. We'll talk a little bit about the other side to this argument, of course, because there is one, and it's a strong one in the bad. However, there's a little bit more to say about the war system and the good that goes along with it. The other thing to note, of course, in Victoria 3 is that it is somewhat world-dependent. Not just on the world that we're building, whether we're building barracks to train battalions or arms factories to supply our units with better guns. Maybe we're researching them at our universities to really ensure that they have the best gear possible. It's also about the physical world that they exist within. Units will have a harder time in low infrastructure territories or where their supply lines have been raided. Impossible terrain and other natural features play out here as well, although you could argue not quite to the level that we might expect in certain areas anyway. Sometimes I'm blown away, other times I'm left wanting a little bit more. In terms of user experience, then, the system allows players to not be bogged down by micromanaging those individual unit movements. Instead, we're tasked with managing the overall equipment that's being distributed, or the technologies that we're researching to try and figure out what equipment to build next. Likewise, of course, those supply lines and our national economy that's supporting the war effort are more in line with what we control as a player in Victoria 3. Then, of course, there's that secondary effect. Who do you promote as your generals, and which interest groups do they align with? Are they militarists, landowners, communists, you name it? depending on who you promote, will somewhat influence the sway that they have and the decisions that you might be able to make in the world of Victoria 3. So it's a system that is not necessarily as significant of a standalone one in terms of player involvement or manual actions as many other Paradox games. But it does present us with the opportunity to handle warfare at a higher level, in line with the design philosophy for Victoria 3. Which probably makes a great transition through to the bad. Let's talk about some of the criticisms of war in Victoria 3, rightly or wrongly placed. One of the more basic ones to start with is visualization, and as I start to enter warfare now with Mexico, you'll get a feel for what visualizing war looks like, especially when there are multiple fronts or multiple wars engaged. Spoiler alert, I'll be in a couple. The visualization could be improved a little bit. Those hot front lines could be animated in different ways, including with troop animations, whether or not we control them. However, the visualization is somewhat of a minor element. The real gripes with war dig a little deeper, and in fact they run in complete contrast, go figure, to the ease of use design philosophy elements that we've just discussed, where warfare is about the quality of goods and technologies, the quantity of them, supply lines, generals, etc. Here, the argument is that warfare is too simple. It's not sophisticated enough that the player can feel hands-on with the conflict that they're meant to be controlling. Is warfare too simple, and at what level? Here, the criticisms go deep. It's too simple at a base level. Fighting. Actually controlling movements. One of the common criticisms is that front lines being automatically applied to natural borders isn't quite even in line with the design philosophy of Victoria 3, where you would expect, even at a hands-off level, from staring down at that war table and plotting out our next moves, we would at least be able to design a few extra front lines instead of being forced to deal with the default ones. That criticism is levied. And then at another level, at a more detailed level, players have criticized many things, including wanting to have more control over how battalions are assigned to individual generals. The current promotion system allows us to do it a little bit, although more of a hands-on approach is desired by some players. Many will argue that a pseudo Hearts of Iron approach is required, where, of course, we don't get down into the nitty-gritty detail, but maybe we can at least draw up a few extra front lines, blacklist territories where our units should avoid, that kind of thing. The argument here is that while it's nice, maybe, to remove ourselves from the micromanagement by just leaving the AI to be assigned to a front line and then just relentlessly push it, it may miss some nuances. Nuances that we might want to apply in our individual strategies that may not be the best min-maxed AI computer-generated ones, but that have a little bit more of that personal flair, that spearheading through the center of Mexico against all odds. It's those kinds of things that can absolutely still happen, and you can inform them and supply them and watch them play out, but you don't have specific manual control to do that in Victoria 3. And there are a few other criticisms. I won't draw on all of them here, but one to note is coastal invasions, coastal defense, again, somewhat related back to that front line drawing or being unable to sort of ring fence or assign territories to certain orders with a certain number of battalions even would be wonderful, sometimes anyway. The key weakness here is that naval invasions, both difficult to track, relating somewhat back to that visualization point at the start, but also, not just tracking, more difficult to even carry out, watch, play out, and defend from as well. So you can see there are a series of bad criticisms levied at Victoria 3, and often these go in complete contrast with its supposed strengths. Hands off, less micromanagement, great, but I want more micromanagement with my front lines, not so great. I think you get the idea. There's one more category to address, though, and that's the unknowns, or the uglies, depending on how we want to frame them. Here, there are really two key things to address. First up, there is at least in my opinion, and here I will breach on that before giving my 2 cents at the end, some polish that's needed. Regardless of whether you agree or disagree with the function, the system, the design philosophy, whatever it may be, there is a little bit of polish needed, particularly when it comes to multiple conflicts, one side backing down or not ceding their demands alternatively. Sometimes it can just be a little bit easy to get lost in the not detail. At least that's just my experience. Do let me know. Regardless of that, though, there's obviously going to be some polish that's required. And if Victoria 3 follows the update schedule of literally any other game in existence, then we should expect it to receive some free updates that provide polish and balance and all of that kind of thing. So it's not actually a bad thing. But it is important to note that we should expect some free change coming soon. As mentioned in the comments recently on one of my videos, the developers talked about this before the game launched as well, about free changes and updates coming to the system, and that we should probably expect those when, I don't know, but important to note nonetheless. Less of an ugly and more of an unknown. However, moving through that point, the second most common ugly or unknown criticism levied at the Victoria 3 system, war system, and even the game more broadly is that Paradox DLC plan, the schedule, how it usually goes. If you're unfamiliar, Paradox makes some fantastic, in my opinion, grand strategy games. Crusader Kings 3, Europa Universalis 4. They actually make a whole load of stuff that I've really enjoyed for a long time. And so I don't say this actually myself through gritted teeth, but rather as a fact. Paradox does release DLC and updates, paid DLC traditionally, for years after their games come out. This is both a good and a bad thing, of course, for the player, and it depends on your perspective, your wallet, your playtime, and all of that sort of thing, which is why I bundle it here in more of the ugly or unknown section. But it's important to note that Victoria 3 will likely change, not just through those polishing free updates that we talked about earlier, but likely also through more significant downloadable content, more significant DLC. Therefore, you should expect the game to change a little bit over the next months or years. This is somewhat crystal ball gazing, I'll admit, so I won't spend any longer on it, other than to say that this system, as I puff at Mexico, look at that beautiful blue Mexico, will also likely be subject to considerable change. And for what it's worth, as but one moron on the internet, here are my concluding impressions. Victoria 3 has a war system that is different from what's come before it. It's more hands-off, most certainly. And if you're a player of many strategy games, you'll find that that's likely your experience coming from others and playing Victoria 3. I think, for what it's worth, it fits broadly within the design philosophy. And as far as war systems go, I actually think it's totally fine. It doesn't put me off playing Victoria 3, and while I acknowledge it will likely change in future, I'm perfectly happy with how it is right now. That being said, it would absolutely be nice if I could place a few different front lines, or find some way to make it easier, or at least clarify with me as the player, that I'm actively defending territory. I don't want to have a naval invasion surprise me out of nowhere when I have plenty of troops, or convoys, or naval ships waiting nearby. Are there improvements to be made? Absolutely. Does it put me off playing Victoria 3? No. And is it a bad system? In my opinion, no. No, not especially, not entirely. Actually, probably not really at all. It works, like a lot of other systems in Victoria 3, from my experience at least, very well. It's a fairly polished experience. Performs well on my PC, and I can't really fault it for allowing me to achieve my goals, aside from some frustrations and rough edges that we've covered in the bad section of this video. Do let me know what you think about Victoria 3's war system below. I am a little hesitant to read the comments on this one, but as always, I'll be delving into them. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.